Oh, sorry, is that if I record for other members?
Yeah, you carry on, yeah. Europe's been a big part of probably all our lives. Over the UK has been a member state for almost 50 years up until Brexit. So we've been a generation, I suppose, that's lived with the joining the EU and being part of the family of nations in Europe. There was just a few things I wanted to touch on just over a short period of time. I know a lot of people have been interested in one of the campaigns that we've been running on the Rosyth Dunkirk Ferry, for example, just to give you a quick update on that. And also want to talk about just I mentioned about committees before, and we had a recent meeting in Brussels with the Business and Trade Committee, which was a very interesting experience. I've got just on my notes just here a bit of a word about Erasmus and Horizon, and as we were saying earlier, while I've been on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly as well, I've also been pushing our connections with the Nordic Council, which again is an interesting body to be engaged with. And I think if we can finish up on just the current EU accession process, and I think we're asking about voting as well for elections that are coming up, so we just finish on that point. So I'll maybe start just with the ferry, just give you a quick update on where we are, because I just see the ferry as being a symbol almost of us re-establishing our links with Europe, not just on a personal basis, because it'll hopefully take passengers, but also developing our trade route back into the EU 27 nations that we quite like to do business with. So the state of play just now is that we have applied for a €2 million maritime grant from the Scottish Government, and we're still waiting to hear on whether that's been successful or not. DFDS would run the service from Rosyth through to Dunkirk, and they already have a really good hub in Dunkirk, so they know the territory really well, and a lot of their infrastructure is already based there. So not only does a service go in from Ireland into that port, but also from the UK and from the Dover routes go through Dunkirk, and also if we could manage a Scottish route from Rosyth, then that would be quite a good hub for us to be part of for future development of trade and passenger traffic. So DFDS are very keen to have the route established, and up until recently we had a very, very good ship that DFDS wanted to apply to the route. Unfortunately, I think we've now lost that, so we need to sort of go back to square one. And I think that's been a symptom of the whole campaign, that as we've got a few pieces of jigsaw in place, some other pieces has fallen off, and so it's always been like that. Even when we were talking about trying to re-establish the Rosyth to Zeebrugge service. So, but I think there's a lot of good things in place. Both partners on both sides of the channel are very keen to see it work, and there are some technical difficulties regarding customs and so on. But I think we've got some good solutions to that. And as far as other funding is concerned, which we probably need over the first few years, just until passenger numbers were built up and freight numbers were built up, then I think we're in quite a good position. But I think everyone's really waiting for the Scottish Government to put their hand in their pocket, and once that's in place, then the UK say, well, once Scotland's put something into the pot, then we'll come in behind it and maybe find some money from our budgets as well, just to give the FDS a little bit of encouragement, financial encouragement to go ahead with the service and just manage that risk that'll be there over the first few years until the numbers are actually make the service viable. I believe it is a viable service. There's no question in terms of the amount of trade we could put through Rosyth, and everyone who's involved in the project, from the port operator to the ferry operator to all other parties, are signed up to the fact that it would be a viable service and would be sustainable over a long period of time. So really, that's where we are in terms of the ferry service. I think my second point was just on the recent visit we had to Brussels as part of the Business and Trade Committee. And part of that as well was that we were looking at two things. We were looking at export-led growth, and that's going to be one of our reports. And the other one was on industrial strategy and industrial policy. So we really got a lot of good feedback from a whole range of different companies, UK companies who were operating and had representative offices in Brussels. We met them. We also met with what people might call Eurocrats. If you're reading some of the pro-Brexit newspapers, I'm sure that's how they describe people who deal with all the administration of the EU. So we met with them and also some politicians as well. I think what was interesting there was that the politicians were, in the main, fairly pragmatic about the UK's decision to leave the EU, whereas the Eurocrats were more, well, we've been working on this European project for 50 years. And these are the rules, and if you don't like the rules, then tough. So it was quite a difference, I found, in the attitude of the Eurocrats and so I'm getting quite a lot of feedback there. So sorry about that. So quite a difference just in attitude in general from the politicians, who I think are a bit more, there are some things that we need to make work. Despite the fact that the UK is now a third country, is no longer a member state. And I think some of the bigger issues raised by companies as well, and where they were feeling it, was in terms of the continued problems with documentation over exports and trade. And also, I think one of the biggest ones that probably everyone mentioned was just the lack of freedom of movement of people. And they saw that as a real negative in terms of trying to improve trade and improve business between the various member states. And we can see that happening in terms of some of the discussions that companies are having to have over skills and qualifications. Are qualifications recognised in different countries, and there might be things like that. And I know that you've been concerned as well about things like the music industry and how the rules and regulations pan out if someone wants to do some cultural event in Berlin, for example. It's just not made as easy as it should be for artists and so on to actually go on tours and things like that. So that's always been a difficult area. So really, that's I have to say as well that in Westminster we've got a number of country-based all-party groups. So it's just a make-up of people who are interested in a certain country or a certain topic. I've been a member of the APPG on France since I became an MP, and again we had a dinner for some companies who trade with France just the week before last. And again, these were some of the issues that I've raised recently about the visit to Brussels. These were sort of front and centre for these companies that were trading between France and the UK. So, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Whether the door will be flung further open to allow the UK to have any sort of special status in terms of being a third country. I don't really think so, if it's left to the bureaucrats. But I think there needs to be some pragmatic solutions found to make life a bit easier on both sides of the channel. Just to say as well that when we were in Brussels a few weeks ago, I have to tell you that we were told to leave early for almost every meeting because the farmers had put hundreds and hundreds of tractors on the streets of Brussels because of some of the difficulties they were having in terms of trading as well. And also, we met with the director of the Ukraine programme for the EU, and while we were there in a meeting, there was just this big sort of whoop went up from all the other offices that were around our meeting room, and at that point, the EU had just decided or made the decision to give a grant of, I think it was 50 billion euros to Ukraine over the next 3 or 4 years, just in terms of supporting the effort that they have at the moment. And obviously, if Ukraine eventually does become a member state in the years to come, then I think that 50 billion of support will be actually absolutely crucial in terms of getting them to that stage, because the whole nation, as we all know from looking at the news, reading the papers and so on, that Ukraine continues to be an exceptionally difficult area in terms of the defence and security of Europe as a whole. And we know that there's a lot of member states, especially around the Baltics, who are exceptionally concerned about that conflict spilling over into their own areas. Erasmus and Horizon, if we can maybe move on to that. So the announcement that was made on Horizon are obviously very, very welcome in terms of support for R&D and research and so on. And I just hope that Scottish universities in particular are in a good position to try and take advantage of some of that, and some of the companies that we have in Scotland as well who invest in R&D, perhaps especially in either medicine or the space sector, for example. I think these are great opportunities for Scotland as well. Should we be able to take advantage of that, the realisation of that new link back into the EU and some of the funding that comes with that. Erasmus, I think, is more of a problem. I think one of the saddest points of Brexit, I think, was the fact that we lost for a long time access to the Erasmus programme. I think it was well regarded, it was well run, it was relatively well funded, and I think for a lot of young people in particular, Erasmus has been a real sort of stain on the mark that has been left by Brexit. I noticed the other day, I think it was a recent comment anyway, the Republic of Ireland are investing 2 million euros as part of a programme to actually offer Erasmus to students in Northern Ireland. So again, I think that is a step in the right direction. If the Scottish scheme that was promised can get anywhere near that, then I'd be absolutely delighted. But maybe just have to wait and see how that comes out in terms of future progress. I said as well just about Nordic Council, which is just in terms of European links, I suppose, maybe not directly EU linked, but Denmark, Sweden, and Finland are all members of the EU, whereas Norway and Iceland are not, and they're members of EFTA. And Greenland is not. I don't think it's a member of either. So, but one of the things that comes out of the Nordic Council all the time is that clear message of collaboration between the various Nordic countries. I think that's something that, again, while I know your organisation is focused on the EU, but I think that kind of collaboration is really good. And I think hands up for from my side, because I'd love to see, if Scotland ever becomes an independent nation, that there's maybe a good place that we could find in terms of working more closely with our Nordic neighbours as well as our European neighbours in the future. And the Nordic Council is actually, it feels like a very good fit for Scotland as well in terms of what we can contribute in terms of, they're doing a lot of work just now in the Nordic Council on the environment, on energy, on food and food waste, and also they didn't really go close to things like defence and security before, but that's much further up their agenda at the moment, just in terms of what's been happening in Ukraine and the position of some of the Baltic states, because they're pretty close to these states. In fact, Sweden, Norway, and Finland border Russia as well. So it's exceptionally important for them to maintain a cohesive and collaborative approach to how they deal with security and defence in that area. The last couple of things that I really want to talk about was just on EU accession, and there's nine nations have put in applications to join the EU. So again, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, Georgia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Moldova, Ukraine, and Turkey. And obviously, they'll all move at different speeds depending on how well they're doing in terms of their accession agreements and country plans and so on. But again, it's good to see that the EU are actually a expansive type of organisation and trying to bring other people to the table, and to the sort of family of nations, of European nations. And while it's not all sweetness and light, I'm sure, across all these EU nations, there is a sense of togetherness, I think, in many respects. And it's good to see how they can work together just the same way as the Nordic countries do it so well in terms of their collaboration. I think it's really good to see that as well. We'll watch with interest just on how quickly and how successfully each of these nations move towards becoming fully grown EU members. Just finally on voting, you mentioned about, I've got some notes here as well, just on the elections that are coming up. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you when the UK election is going to be. But I think smart money is probably still on October this year, October, November time, and it'll be my written on my epitaph, I suppose, if the Prime Minister chooses to go in May and announces it next week. But it's I think all the political parties are now seriously gearing up for an election. There's no doubt about that. And whatever one that you support, then obviously you'll be in tune with whichever party that you prefer yourself. But I think for British people living abroad, then they can register or have a proxy or postal vote, and that can be done right up to, I think it's 11 days before the election date, just as you would normally have in this country. Or you can obviously, if they're in the country, they can turn up and vote, but they need to be already registered before that point. And there's also the very important EU elections, and while we don't really have a say in that, they'll happen between the 6th and 9th of June, and all EU nationals living in the UK can or should have registered by now if they want to have a vote in these elections. But again, it can be done in by post or in person, depending on where people are. I just checked out I've pretended to be Belgian this afternoon and just checked out the Belgian site. So yeah, it did confirm that their vote will be on the 9th of June, which is the Sunday, and they'll go straight into their count beyond that. So again, if you're a Belgian person living in the UK and you've already registered, then you can express your desire to who you want to vote for in the European elections come the 9th of June. And I can say that can either be done in person or by post. So I think that's really, you wanted me to say something about NATO as well. I'll just finish off. I was in part of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly for a couple of years, and basically what happens is that the UK as a member state sends a cross-party group of MPs to the NATO Assembly, wherever that may be, and it gets moved around the various NATO countries. Like I've been out to Halifax in Nova Scotia, and I've had one there in January, and I can tell you we arrived in snow and we left in snow, and one of our, or two or three members of our delegation decided to do an interesting flight out to Quebec first, I think it was, and then got a joining flight. So we didn't see them until the Tuesday. It started on the Sunday, so we didn't see them until the Tuesday because they just got waylaid with all the snow. But we've been in various other places. They've had one in London and one in Paris as well when I was a member. And there they basically have defence and security experts come and talk to politicians about the direction of travel in NATO, and what various approaches and policies mean in terms of your own nation, plus what it means for NATO as a whole. So it's actually very interesting to see it from the other side, if you like, because as we said earlier, NATO's not always an open and transparent organisation, but it's actually very interesting to see how things work behind the scenes and how decisions are made. And obviously they've been very busy. The time I was in there, it was pre some of the serious stuff in Ukraine. It wasn't the hot war; it was more leading up to that. But they're also doing a lot of work on things like space, we met a few astronauts and things like that during our discussions. And one of the things that I thought was really good was when the Canadians wanted to put someone into space on. I think they were part of the American team, but they had their big white suit with the Canadian flag on their arm. So there's lots of pictures like that. But they had a really good system that they put a lot of the discussion out into schools and asked a lot of kids what they thought or who they thought the person should be to represent Canada in the team and things like that. So actually, in terms of I think we're always struggling to find ways to engage young people in STEM subjects, the science, technology, and mathematics, and so on. But they actually took it into schools, and it inspired a generation in Canada to actually understand and ask questions about space and what an impact that was going to have in future years. And obviously, again, Scotland's a big space nation in terms of jobs and businesses we have here. So again, I'd love to see Scotland do something like that as well, just a bit more imaginative than in my old days when we used to sit in front of the algebra teacher and for 45 minutes, and the only thing you were thinking about at probably the time is when does all this finish? And it was always a complete mystery to most of the people in the class. Well, I only speak for myself, I must admit, in terms of that. But anyway, I think that's where we are in terms of NATO as well. And obviously, very, very happy to take any questions or comments from the floor.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Resume. And I really hope whatever happens to the date of the election, that you manage to get the Rosyth Ferry up and running.
Definitely, yeah, that would be that's the number one priority.
We would all be very grateful to you for that. But it is for those of us who are Belgian, and thank you for the reminder that I can vote on the 9th of June. It's a little bit sad that it's going to Dunkirk, but I guess that's maybe quite a good route for other points. But we were always amazed when we used to come home from Zeebrugge on the ferry how heavily populated it was by Dutch and Germans coming on holiday to Scotland, and they may not go to Dunkirk in quite the same numbers as they went to Zeebrugge, but we'll see. So I was also really interested to hear about the Nordic Council just before I open up to other floors, because when I was in a private office in the Scottish Government for the Agriculture and Environment Minister, we used to go to Nordic Council meetings quite regularly. He was very interested in building that. And I think you're so right that we've got a lot of interests in common. So I wonder if do they feel differently about Brexit? Or do they feel quite keen?
Sorry, you're just breaking up a little bit. What was the question?
Did you find the other members of the Nordic Council are quite keen to have Scotland there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a meeting that I managed to get to in Copenhagen, and the issue with the Nordic Council is that for our Parliament in Westminster, the invitations come through the Speaker's office. So I had to go out with one of the deputy speakers to Copenhagen, and she was speaking on behalf of the whole of the UK. So it wasn't always possible to actually make a contribution, but I think they would, I've made quite a good friendship with the general director of the Nordic Council, who was originally a MP in the Faroe Islands. So Christina is very, very, very pro-Scottish and very interested in everything that's happening here politically. And so she got me to sit next to the president at our first lunch just after we arrived, and that was his first question. When is Scotland going to come and join us? So, and I must admit that's something that you hear from a lot, even in our recent meeting in Brussels. I know that our ministers are told not to discuss anything that's out with their devolved remit, but people ask you about it all the time. It's almost impossible not to discuss it. But from the Nordic Council point of view, I think they see Scotland as a natural fit in terms of our attitude to quite a few things, and we've got so many things in common. That I think one of the discussions that they had was about how do we support our rural economies. If we think we've got some wild areas in Scotland, then you should try Finland or in the north of Sweden, and how do you supply education and health and all these other services into very, very small communities and do it well. And so some of the problems that they've got are similar to ours. And how do you provide these services in quite challenging conditions? So there's a lot of discussion that can happen, and a lot of, again, coming back to the collaboration word, a lot of collaboration that can be done in trying to understand the problems a lot better than we do at the moment, and maybe learn from each other.
Yeah, just keeping close with our neighbours, basically.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to follow up on any of the points that Douglas was making? Any other question?
These are the meetings I love. That's it.
I've got some more. Anybody else has got any? Oh, Paul.
You mentioned the upcoming European elections.
Yes.
And certainly the media in Europe that I've been looking at predict a lurch to the right in terms of the political representation within the hemisphere. What are your views on that? Do you think that's likely to happen? And if it does, what's the consequence going to be?
Yeah, it's again a great question, and I think that's something that is troubling a lot of people in Brussels and Strasbourg at the moment, because they just don't know how these elections will end up coming out, and it's could be quite a mixed bag. But at the same time, I think, as you suggest, the media are suggesting that there may be a bit of a lurch to the right, which I think a lot of people in Brussels see as a real problem, because I think a lot of the programmes and a lot of the European activity might not be supported as well as it might be by a new parliament that's got a different political complexion to the existing one. So it's I'm always just amazed at the number of parties that do manage to get elected to the European Parliament as well. It's a really broad spectrum, but if that moves in general off to the right, then I think that makes life a lot more difficult. I think we had some Finnish MPs in Westminster last week, and I think they were saying that we understand the British system. We know you've got a two-party system, and I said, well, we're the third party in the UK in terms of numbers being elected. So, and there's quite a few more than that, in the UK. But obviously, we have run a more or less a two-party system for decades now, whereas in Finland, even within the member state, I think they had 10 or 12 different parties represented in the Finnish Parliament, and I think that just gives you a taster for what the European Parliament might end up on or as, depending on where these parties want to sit in terms of their groupings and various other things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think I share probably some of your concerns just on the potential outcome on June the 9th.
Is Ursula von der Leyen going to get another term?
Well, I think the feeling is that that will happen, but I think we just need to wait and see as well how the elections come out, and but I think that wasn't quite a given, but I think she's in a strong position to either to move up or to remain where she is.
Thank you.
I think the other thing that's quite worrying from a Scottish point of view, if there is this big shift in the European Parliament, is that although our number of MEPs was small, they were well known across the hemisphere and well liked, and so lots of MEPs really knew and understood the Scottish position, and we're going to have to go back to Brussels and explain that really clearly to the new MEPs, because that's quite a big job if there's really a bigger change as some people think that there's going to be.
Yeah. I can understand that as well. It's I mean, there's always churn and I mean, I think there's going to be a huge amount of churn in the UK elections, the next election whenever it falls. But it's we probably need to, as you suggest, do a bigger educational job in terms of the new MEPs coming in, just because of the scale of the breadth of diversity, I suppose, that you're going to get within that hemicycle. Yeah,
well, holding Scotland House very dear to my heart, I do hope that Scotland House will out there.
Yeah. Well, I actually heard that the Scotland House were actually doing a very, very good job. So when we were in Brussels a few weeks ago, it's a sort of question that MPs tend to ask. How are we being seen in Brussels, or how are we being seen in Strasbourg? So and I think the Scottish operation was actually held in very high regard. So at least we know we've got a good team there. So it's how they engage with maybe a fresh range of MEPs whenever they get elected.
Yeah, and I think bringing people out from here to Scotland House to meet new MEPs and to really put the Scottish situation up there.
Yeah. Even within the British Embassy, I think they were talking about the Scottish team punching above their weight. So they are sort of well known, and they do put on a good show when they have to. So that's good to know.
And they throw a good party, which in Brussels is
not. Exactly.
So any more questions from anyone else? Paul, Northway this time.
I was very encouraged by the update about the ferry from Rosyth, because I've been following that for quite a while. It's very interesting that it seems to be more a time process now from what you were talking about rather than an if. Do you think it's a when we get the ferry now?
That's certainly the way that we're thinking about it. I thought that when I think we were trying to get progress made before Christmas, and when that didn't come forward, and we didn't hear back from the from either the UK government or the Scottish government, we thought, well, maybe they just want to put it really on the back burner. But the FDS have come back again and said, look, we're really, really keen to do this. But I think they're just looking for a bit of. It's more a signal to the market, in fact, Paul. I think just to say, that the governments are supporting it, and it doesn't have to be hard cash. I mean, it could be, if like Visit Scotland are prepared to put in a marketing campaign over the first couple of years, and maybe do some work in kind rather than in cash. I think that would give the right signals to DFDS, because I think they're taking on a risk for a few years until they can build up the customer base, and they just want a bit security. I think, just to say, that the government is behind this, and if push comes to shove, then they'll put a package together that would actually be supportive. We do have issues as well, just in terms of customs. Some of the trucks that come in would need to be checked, and we don't have the facilities in Rosyth to do that. But what we've suggested is by means of a solution is that there are inspection facilities at Grangemouth. So there's a small number of trucks that would come in each day on each service that would need to be checked, and they would just need to be driven to Grangemouth. And now the border control people say, well, what happens if somebody brings a truck across and then just goes, AWOL, just goes, into the ether, and we don't know what's happened to the contents of their vehicle. But there's so many technical things they can do now. They can put markers and all sorts of trackers on loads now. So you could actually follow a lorry going between Rosyth and Grangemouth to be checked. Check it on screen, and you would know if it decided to do to dump its load in Bo'ness or somewhere else, Linlithgow, then you would know exactly where that had happened, because it would be tracked all the way. So there is a facility in Grangemouth. I think it cost about £1 million to build it a few years ago, and as taxpayers, you'll be delighted to know that it's never ever been used. So we are hoping that while we don't want to spend another £1 million in Rosyth just to replicate these facilities that are used for a small number of loads, but if we can use the Grangemouth facility and convince Border Force that it would actually work, then that might be quite a considerable saving as well, that DFDS or the port would need to find, which just makes it more difficult to give people the confidence that it would be a long-term sustainable service. Just for interest, anything that comes across into Dover actually goes to Ashford and Kent to be checked. So it's not as if it's a novel thing to do. Loads are not checked actually in Dover; they're checked outside the area of the port. So there is a precedent to have that done, and I think Forth Ports see it as being a viable solution. So we're hoping that we can convince others that that would work as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the Dover situation, because I was going to say that. I think that is part of the framework that would make it easier to actually have the Rosyth ferry port working.
Yep.
And as far as just purely anecdotally, when we have mentioned it on the street stalls that we run, there is a huge support for the ferry service being reintroduced. And we have run street stalls all over Fife, and it's the same everywhere. I think it would be a fairly big take up, not just from the tourist point of view, but from the trade point of view, because we've talked to people who have just basically got their business stuck in English ports, and as a result, stopped trading with Europe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of things we're looking at as well. You know, just that smaller loads as well, and you know the technology that they've got just now. You know, you might not be able to fill a whole truck or a whole container with whatever you want to export. You maybe just need half the container, but you don't want that being stuck in another port with what with half a load of something else somewhere in Europe. So there are clever ways of doing that as well. So, and again, I'm sure there's people on this call who know more about this than I do, but you know, I think that's just because of the technology, it allows you to be a bit smarter in the way that you break loads down to more manageable size and something that fits what the customer actually wants. You know, I think all these things as well would actually help exports from Scotland and building up that level of trade with the EU. And I think that's really important as well for anybody involved in making the case to rejoin the EU as well. That, you know, just building up that level of trade with the EU from Scotland is very good. We're an exporting nation, you know, and we should be pushing that a lot more to make sure that you know, we have full access and easier access to the markets we want to serve.
Yeah, because access is so much easier from the south of Scotland into the north of England than it is through Dover.
Yeah. Yeah.
So John,
can I make a point that is interesting? Because I have a son who works for a French company, and I was talking to him last week, and he was talking about the lorry loads that come in from France, having to go through all the paperwork, and then the lorry is returning empty because they can't get in time to pick up the return loads. And if you have a split load, you've still got all the paperwork has to be completed for both halves. Yeah. And obviously that's a burden for business. And in the end of it, we all pay for that indirectly.
Yeah, it's very costly. And it's not the best use of your infrastructure either, you know, because it's, I mean, we all know if you know, there's a snowstorm at the airport or something, you've got so many planes that are just in the wrong place the following day. So it takes like 2 or 3 days just to get everything back in sync again. And the same things happens with
the other thing about Rosyth or having a boat or from Scotland is you're going to reduce the miles that are being consumed on the roads and the wear and tear on those.
Yeah. No, there's a huge saving in emissions as well. And you know, I think one thing as well that if there's one area that I see moving quite quickly to net zero, it's maritime, because you can you know, in terms of shipping, you know, you can probably that area, that sector will be probably the first to move into like hydrogen powered ships and things like that. The Norwegians are already ahead of the game in terms of that, albeit on a fairly small scale. But you know, in terms of you know, creating a fuel source that's pretty much net zero, then or helping you get to that stage, then maritime is of a scale that you can actually do it really well.
Yeah,
and then as you say, it's probably easier to do it with ships than it is to do with individual trucks and lorries that are up and down the A1 every day or up and down the M62.
Coming back to Paul's previous point about the right wing, it's interesting that we should see that the power of the mass making Hungary toe the line, because I think that's an important point actually, because they have a very right-wing government as it stands at the moment, but the pressure from the mass of the EU forced their hand. So I don't know what I'm saying here, but I'm just thinking it's an important point that there is pressure can be brought to bear. And that's where the EU is a consolidating factor involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Seen very clearly when the president of the council was handing in resignation. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So Michelle was going to leave, and all the other leaders were like, no way, because what happens when the president of the European Council steps down, if they find a successor quickly enough, then the person whose country has the presidency automatically becomes the president of the European Council, which if Michel left in June would have been Erdogan. So there was a huge hoo-ha, and he was obviously made to rethink very quickly about his idea of resigning. Could I just take it briefly to Erasmus and Horizon? As you said, it's great that Horizon's up and running again, although it seems to be taking quite a while to really filter back down to people getting grants. And then on Erasmus, as you said, now Ireland's supporting Northern Ireland, and Wales got themselves on the ground with a new programme in Wales. And we're just a bit disappointed because initially we did a lot to try and put across to the public that the Scottish Government were going to be creating a Scottish programme that would really take over where the plus bit of Erasmus Plus has been lost. And we've been told that there's been a project running, but we've seen no evidence. And I've got a question into officials in the Scottish Government. And I know you're not here from the Scottish side of things, but as an SNP MP, I just wondered if you were aware at all of whether there has been a trial of this proposed Scottish programme yet.
It's not something I'm particularly aware of, but it's I just go back to the question I think asked about Boris Johnson at the time, to say that when the result came through, that was one of the first things that ran through my mind was the fact that so many young people would actually miss out on really connecting with the European family of nations, and I think that was one of the sad things. But I really haven't heard anything at all in terms of any pilot or whatever. But it's we're not usually over absolutely everything that happens in the Scottish Parliament, unfortunately. Yeah.
Back again, positive, because just in defence momentarily as a former EU official of the Eurocrats, I think I can understand why they're a little bit pissed off with the UK, because they bent over backwards to keep the UK in Erasmus, and I think because my husband was on the negotiation table for that one, and I think everyone's mouths just dropped open when the UK finally said, actually, we don't want Erasmus, thanks all the same, because we could in it. They were happy to have us as associate members, and it's just so sad, very sad. So we are really pushing now. We in fact started a petition to try and what we call unlock Erasmus, to have something, even if it's not quite as large or as broad as Erasmus was, but something that has a scope beyond university students making. So we will keep pushing at that door as hard.
Good. Yeah.
So anyone else who's not had a chance to ask something who'd like to? Anybody else? No. The other thing that we were very disappointed with the Scottish Government for failing to do was really make a big thing about their paper on Europe. The series of papers that are coming out. It's what we would be doing if we were in independent Scotland. And it was a great paper, but really nobody heard much about it unless you were interested in Europe already. So that was such a wasted opportunity, because they could have got all the pro-EU groups in Scotland, and there's quite a lot of us together, and we could have really made a bit of fanfare about it. So we're a bit sad about that, and also that the one on the economy hasn't come, because that's always, as a cross-party group, we very much are open to either route back to the EU, whether it's as an independent nation or as part of the UK, and we always have to say that when we're running stalls. But it is something that people who think that it'd be quicker to get back as an independent nation always ask, but until we know about the economy, we're not sure that we want to support an independent Scotland. So we're a bit sad that paper's a long time coming. I don't know if on that point.
No, again, I think there was one out today, or within the last 24 hours anyway. But and I'm sure the economy one will be coming as well. But it's as you say, I think it's crucial. But I think when you look back at some of the papers that have come out, they've been really poorly distributed, if you like. And I think we should, as you say, I think the government should be making more of either the findings or the recommendations, or just explaining a bit more. And we maybe need to be a bit more, I don't know, inventive and creative in getting that message across, because producing a paper and putting it in front of journalists, I don't think they're really taking that bait. I think it's more. I think a lot of them are written by civil servants and so on, which is not a bad thing. But I mean, I don't think it's always delivered with the enthusiasm that perhaps it should be. And I think there's probably a lot of ideas that have been in all of them, but really are not getting out there to excite people the way that they should. Yeah, I mean, both on the Erasmus thing and on that, I mean, it's we do get to speak to ministers on occasional basis, so I will raise that both these issues when I get a chance to do that as well, and just to see if we can get a bit more oomph behind the Europe paper in particular. But as you say, understanding, I mean, the economy is going to be the deciding factor, I think, in terms of whether if we get another kick at the independence ball very soon, then I think the economy is going to be absolutely crucial to that. But and you just can't say, well, look at the economy we have in the UK at the moment and use that as a negative argument. I mean, it's some of the things, I don't know what the Chancellor's going to come out with on Wednesday, but he's hardly got any wiggle room at all in terms of things he can do to actually embolden the economy. So you think, can it be any worse than being independent? But I think we just need to have a much more positive case in terms of what my party certainly and what I would want for our own country. But I know there'll be other people on the call who've got different views. But that's if we're taking that as the bottom line for myself, then I'd want that message to go out a lot more enthusiastically than perhaps you would get through just issuing a report or a paper. I mean, there needs to be a range of other things that happen at the same time.
Well, it'd be interesting to hear if you do get word back from ministers, because if there is a positive story to say there has been a pilot, then we're very happy to share that on our stalls as well.
I'm sure you would be, yes, yeah, and I think you'd be very good advocates for that as well. So we've got to use the resources, all the resources of the nation to actually get us through. Yeah.
I don't know if you had your sound on when we were chatting earlier, but there is going to be a really big celebration of Europe Day on the 11th and 12th of May in Edinburgh at the old vet school at Summer Hall. And
okay, yep.
So we'll be putting out invitations, and hopefully a minister might come along. So we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be good. Right, fantastic.
I think I'd say on behalf of all of us, a really big thank you for coming tonight, and a really big thank you for all that you're doing to try to link us up again by ferry to the mainland. It would be lovely to have that back.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed, and hopefully it all comes together at the right time. And it's but thanks for having me on as well. And then just more power to your elbows as well. And it takes a lot just to be out on a Saturday morning, giving up your own time to speak to people. But I think I've passed the stall at the Stockbridge Market a few mornings. I've spoken to a few people there, and they're not at all pushy or anything like that. They're just having really, really positive conversations with people, and respecting their point of view, but at the same time, there's a lot to play for, and trying to get back into Europe is, I think it's something in terms of a legacy we can leave our next generation. That's something that we should all be working towards.
Oh yeah.
Next generation involved, because it's their future. They've got to understand what they've lost.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, so thank you very much. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but thank you,
No
Douglas.
problem. Right, have a nice evening.